Well, Brexit is literally just officially days away, but as we've said before on this channel, it is only the beginning of this whole mess that we are about to get ourselves in. And one thing you certainly can pin on the Brexiteers is that this is all their fault. They are the ones in charge. They are the ones at the wheel now. You can't get out of it. One thing that we have to make sure is that they own it. Whenever they try to blame anyone, be it Europe, Remainers, whatever, it's their fault. They're the ones that wanted this. They're the ones who said this is the quote-unquote best idea. We're already seeing numerous articles from Australia and the US already saying that they will force us to accept their standards. Now, remember, we were in the European Union where we had a say in what these standards were. Of course, Brexiteers didn't really care. They were just, oh, these aren't our standards. Well, congratulations, you're now being forced to accept, laws and, regulations that are not made in the UK. They will be forced upon us by the US. And by the way, once you accept one of these standards, you then can't retroactively go back and make a law. That's how trade deals work. You don't seem to understand the mess we are getting into, and we're going to go into a very good article written by Ian Dunt tomorrow that goes over just this whole mess, and it's really written out really well in a really simple way. But before we get to that today, we are going to cover, because I said this would happen, everyone else said this would happen, that the right-wing press would start to prime and de-escalate their audience. Okay, we can ooh-rah-rah about Brexit, but all of a sudden, they're going, this isn't going to end well. We need to de-escalate our audience, because if our audience is at this level, when in reality their dreams are being dashed against the rocks, there's going to be a bit of a rebellion. Not an actual full-on rebellion, but, stuff could happen. I doubt it will be, but it probably will result in the Tories getting absolutely punished at the polls. So, what better than to start to de-escalate things, to start to, shall we say, question the official narrative. And this comes from all places. We already read the article from the Mail, but this, from the Mail on the Mirror. This comes from the Daily Mail. Now it is still going to be ooh-rah-rah cheerleading, but you're going to be noticing that there's a slight down trickle and a slight de-playing of the situation and questioning, lo and behold, the Tory government. Because as we've said before, when you're in charge, you're the ones at the wheel. And, well, who knows? Could we start reading some more Mail articles on this channel criticising Brexit? I'll tell you now, I will be reading them and I will be pointing out, we told you so from the beginning when they come out. So here we are. So this comes from Dan Hodges. Why some ministers are asking whether Boris Johnson has a clue what to do next. So this isn't the paper. It's, some ministers. And these ministers aren't going to get named. So, last week I spoke to a minister who told me about the confusion and contradiction that, according to his account, is starting to spread like a political coronavirus through Boris Johnson's administration. Quote, I think the problem is that they had a clear plan to win the election and get Brexit done, he said. But now that's been achieved, they are struggling to define how to move forward. Which was a polite way of saying what has seemingly increasingly obvious to many in Westminster. Having secured a decisive 80-seat mandate from the electorate, Boris Johnson and his team don't know what to do with it. So last week they were pointing everyone to a half-empty Commons chamber as Deputy Speaker Niall Evans formally announced the passage of the Brexit Withdrawal Bill into law. It was greeted with some choreographed cheers from the Tory benches, but no one was fooled. Brexit, quote, got done by the British people on December 12th, and since then the government has been in a state of suspended animation. So they're now questioning the government. Hey, hold on, what's this whole Brexit thing? Because Boris Johnson has been trying to put forward this idea that Brexit is done, that it's been dealt with. But it is, as we've said at the beginning of this video, it is only the beginning of the beginning. This is only just the very start of Brexit. You've got the whole year. The idea that there is going to be a trade deal signed with the EU, the US, in a year is simply impossible. It cannot happen. Any trade expert will tell you a trade deal just cannot be done with the amount that has to be done. Is just impossible. Trade deals take about 10 years to do. And even the EU, there have been a number of trade deals that have just come through very recently with Mexico, Japan, Canada. All of those took about 10 years. So anyway, the article continues. So, no clear line on Iran. Uncertainty and continued cabinet infighting over Huawei. Chaotic briefings and counter-briefings over HS2. Most tellingly little than 45 days in, that resembles a coherent strategy or vision for the country. Yeah, this was it. I kept on telling people, look, just because they're going, oh, get Brexit done, it's not a campaign strategy. You have to plan beyond that. And they did not offer anything beyond that, because I think they were hoping for a hung parliament. I think that was what they were hoping for, to come to some sort of compromise. But it didn't. They got their 80-seat majority and then thought, oh, well, we'll do what we want. And that's the terrifying thing. A party with no direction now that they've got their thing done, what do they do with it? They're a dog that's now caught the ambulance and doesn't know what to do with it. So another minister painted the following picture. Everything's been left to pile up. We've had no coherent Iran response for days. We've got HS2, another rail report, 5G, something on education, the budget. Nothing's been decided. To understand why this chaos is emerging, it helps to remember something lost in the drama of the election night. Confusion has lurked amid the Johnson administration since day one. The idea of the Downing Street grand strategy was always a myth. Remember, we were told what the master plan was. Boris had learned the lesson of Theresa May's reckless election gamble. What was needed was someone who would stare down Brussels, Parliament, and the rest of the British establishment and drive Brexit through on a plan of no deal departure. The idea, okay, that's not going to happen. Once again, I said there was still going to be this ooh-rah-rahing of the government and Brexit. Boris Johnson, he ain't going to be staring down Brussels. They are just not strong enough to do it. Our economy is nothing compared to that of the EU's. It ain't going to happen. The idea, and you know this, one of the things that the Brexiteers said at the very start was that all these European countries would start to infight, and it would break up, and it'd be easy. We'd play them off against each other. That hasn't happened. And going forward into the trade talks, it still hasn't happened. And for a no deal departure, bear in mind, even if Johnson has this majority, there is still no will in Parliament to deliver a no deal Brexit. Because all these guys, bar the ERG, remember, when this came, if you remember, think back to last summer where we had the series of indicative votes, only 68 of the MPs voted for a no deal Brexit. That is nothing. So even if you say that these new MPs want to vote for a, quote, no deal Brexit, it ain't going to happen. They don't want it. Remember, Theresa May had this same problem. She knows Brexit is going to cause all this damage, and sooner or later, they are going to have the ones to take responsibility for it. They don't want to take responsibility. The only way to really, I mean, Have I Got News For You posted an amazing bit on their Facebook page which sums all this up. If only there was this single market we could join that would solve all of Boris Johnson's problems. And that's it. And we've gone on this before. You know, all these the guys, especially in the free traders, which you're going to see being hailed as the big thing. Free trade, free trade, free trade. It's not really a big thing. They misunderstand what free trade really means. Free trade is just the removal of tariffs and the lowering of barriers to trade. And the most successful of those in the entire world is the EU single market. And we're leaving that. So, anyway, it continues. So what actually happened was that Parliament outmanoeuvred him, the courts outfoxed him, and Brussels stood firm. Boris was left with no option but to throw his DUP partners out of the balloon and cut a deal with Leo Varadkar. Jeremy Corbyn then committed Harry-Carry by agreeing to override the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, and the rest is history. Which doesn't mean that Boris doesn't have qualities besides winning elections. He has many of them. I told you this would be... If you want Boris Johnson with qualities, he won this election on a lie. He's already been called out on his lie for his hospitals. That ain't going to happen. The government recently just announced that they would get back all this money to reopen the railways. That money, if you look at the bill, has nothing to do with reopening railways. All it is a survey. It's commissioned a survey to look at reopening the railways, not actually rebuilding the railways. So once again, the government has lied to people. But then again, we have to remember what they are, or more importantly, what we are told they were when he secured the leadership of his party. We were promised the antithesis of a dour administrator, Theresa May. Boris was fizzing with energy and ideas. He had the hunger and charisma to drive the government forward. Like his hero Winston Churchill, he would lead from the front, vanquish the naysayers, and march the nation to heroically into the roaring 20s. Yet, where are we this morning? We are told he is minded to rubber stamp Mrs. May's decision to grant Chinese access to the 5G network, despite shrill US objections. Now, the US is doing this because it wants to throw its weight around and try and counter China. The Daily Mail desperately wants that deal to happen. So, of course, it's criticising this. Oh. Jesus, what's happened now? There we go. Why has it done that? Anyway, so yeah, it's basically bullying actions against China, and you've already seen this. The US saying, no, you can't have that. Wait, I thought we were meant to be a sovereign country making our own decisions. Why are we allowing the US to dictate what we do? I thought we were a sovereign country, Brexiteers. Where are we this morning? So, Grant, despite shrill US objections, or he may not. He may axe one of the largest infrastructure projects in British history into which billions have already been sunk, or he may not. But in any case, according to his officials, whatever is decided, we should not expect to see too much from him over the coming months. His role is going to be that of a traditional Prime Minister, or even a traditional Cabinet Minister, but more a chairman of the board. Ask ministers and officials where the government's dynamism and direction will be coming from over the next 5 years, and you're going to be met with a shrug. Some point to Michael Gove, for which they claim to be a formal de facto evaluation to the role of Deputy Prime Minister. Others identify Marina Mires, Director of the Number 10 Policy Unit, who hasn't been framed as a firecracker or new conservatism. But that was also her framing in advance of the publication of the Tory election manifesto, which turned out to be notably solely for its timidity. The name that pops up most frequently is Dominic Cummings, the MP's ragged skirt scavegal. But his obsession seems to be internal reform of Whitehall, the BBC, and the parliamentary press lobby, all of which may be perfectly worthy, which it's not. But when I was out on a stump in Bolsover and Bishop Auckland during the election campaign, people seemed to be concerned about crime, hospitals and schools rather than the disparity between the number of civil servants, science and arts graduates. Which is true. The only party leader to discuss that was Jeremy Corbyn. But yeah, we won't get into that. Oh, go away. Oh, what are you doing? Sorry, the Daily Mail website is not optimized for a mobile phone. It keeps on jumping to stupid other stuff. So there we are. So one striking example of the dysfunctionality is the leadership vacuum it's creating. It's provided the current chaos over HS2. Boris, who developed a love for high-vis politics during his time as London Mayor, is said to favour the project, but key members of his team don't. So Tory MPs are now receiving calls from Number 10 officials ordering them to come to Downing Street to lobby against the scheme. It's nuts. We're being told by Number 10 to demand to come into Number 10 to lobby Number 10, one backbencher told me. Another is the confusion over Huawei. Everyone is being told that our number one priority is securing a trade deal, says one minister, and then we're being told to sign off on Huawei, which is, quote, going to piss off the Americans. Some of the turmoil is an inevitable consequence of any change of leadership mid-government. Tony Blair, David Cameron had years to map out in the minute detail of their first 100 days strategy. Boris and his team have had about 3 weeks between the disastrous local election results that sealed Theresa May's fate and the announcement of her resignation, which effectively started the Tory leadership race. Any other major factor of this identity crisis is that has beset Boris at the moment he embraced Brexit, has begun to position himself for the leadership, and the only one ally has said to me, the reality is he's a liberal, modernising, one-nation conservative. People can try to pin whatever they want on him, but that's who he sees. That's who he was as a mayor of London, because that's who the real Boris Johnson is, and it's not. Boris Johnson is anything but a liberal. He's not a liberal economically. He doesn't seem to be a socially liberal. I'm sorry. Modernising, yeah, no. One nation, it pretty much looks like Northern Ireland and Scotland are going to leave the Union, so how he's going to stop that from happening other than just denying them the vote? We don't know. Um, but Brexit and the destruction of Labour's Red Wall were not a product of modern liberalism. They were a brutal repudiation of it, and it's clear that, unlike Thatcher or Blair, Boris has no ideological GPS to guide him. The master opportunist of British politics is being forced to make things up as he goes along, and that's what should worry people. And then, of course, that should be worrying. A Prime Minister making stuff up as he goes along should be worrying, but of course, this is the Daily Mail, so which it goes on to say, which can have its benefits. Not being weighed down by an ideological straitjacket gives more flexibility to avoid elephant traps and to react to events. And Sir Keir Starmer continues to position himself as Corbyn with a haircut. No, he's not like Corbyn. There is little, although that's interesting, the fact that they are already starting to target Keir Starmer, and the Labour leadership elections in March, April, something like that. March, I think. So yeah, they're already worrying about who's going to win, and that's their idea of what I think they're going to try and attack him on. He's just Corbyn with a different haircut. So what? Corbyn's policies are popular, and as we've said, hospitals, schools, crime, all things Labour said they would tackle in their manifesto, and I've said over the next 5 years they should focus on just a couple of things, and if they do that, they've got the next election in the bag. Because if you're fighting someone by the seat of their pants, that means they've got no strategy. That means whenever they say something randomly, and you're like, okay, give me the hard facts, you can just demolish them, because you can come back to them with all these facts. Look at what your policy did this, you did this, the Tories did this, which is what we've got to do. So yeah, it essentially just goes on to do about blah blah blah, Boris Johnson. He's brilliant, Boris Johnson. Yeah, I'm not reading the rest, quite frankly, because it's just basically making up stuff about Boris Johnson, which quite frankly isn't true. The quite worrying fact is, no one in their right mind in that position should be flying by the seat of their pants. They should be having a plan, and they clearly don't, which again should be worrying a lot of people. But there you go. And yeah, once again, Boris Johnson he's gonna have a lot of problems. And as we've said, the Tories like to fight. You'll notice that there was mention of a leadership vacuum. If the Daily Mail are pointing out the fact that there's a leadership vacuum, there will be Tory infighting. How is Boris going to quell that Tory infighting? Because, as we've said before, there are two factions in the Tory party. One party of the party that wants to continue Thatcher's revolution and just deregulate everything. The other side of the party, which are more moderates, which were again brought in under David Cameron and during the Blair years, don't want that. They realise the importance of regulation. There's going to be a fight. And I'm looking forward to that, because that's just going to paralyse the government completely.